The Legend of Zelda tells the legends of a boy who collects hundreds of Korok droppings, steals thousands of rupees from innocent civilians, and rounds up dozens of masks that involuntarily make him do questionable gestures, all in an attempt to be the most ballin' kid in Hyrule. Most players of Zelda games attempt to round up all these collectibles across the various games at a relaxed pace, but I'll be attempting to obtain every single collectible or 100% complete every single one of the mainline 2D top-down Zelda games in only 14 days. Now you may be thinking, 14 days? That's a really long time, so this challenge should be a piece of cake, right? Wrong. So wrong. I'll be playing through the 10 games that you see up on the screen now, most of which take dozens of hours to 100% complete due to the sheer amount of content I'll have to play through. I'm speaking to you guys after taking on this challenge, but these games nearly made me lose my mind. From jank minigames to unforgivable RNG to certain collectibles that take literal hours to acquire, this is a monumental challenge not for the faint of heart. So with that out of the way, join me on my adventure as I attempt to 100% complete every 2D mainline Zelda game in only 14 days. Kicking things off on the morning of the first day, we have Zelda 1 for the NES. The first 2D Zelda game to be released, and coincidentally, the first ever Zelda game to be released. Now before I jump right into this game, you may be thinking, what is required to reach 100% status for each of these Zelda games I'll be playing? These games don't have a traditional completion tracker like many other games out there do, so it's not exactly straightforward what I'll need to be doing. Speedrun.com has rules set for the 100% speedrunning category for each game, but these categories oftentimes omit requirements that I think should count towards 100% completion. Most of the things that are omitted are collectibles that are pretty obscure, or collectibles that take way too long to collect and would make speedrunning 100% runs incredibly tedious and annoying. For the most part, I'll be following the criteria posted on Zelda Wiki because that houses the strictest 100% completion criteria I could find. I'm kinda shooting myself in the foot here going with a stricter rule set, but if I'm taking on this challenge, I feel like it's best to do it right. And I don't think something should be omitted from collecting just because it's annoying and takes a lot of time. Also, the annoying BS collectibles are probably a large reason why you all clicked on this video anyway. As an overall summary, I'll be doing everything in each game that leads to some sort of exclusive reward, or collecting everything that has some sort of limited supply in game. So I will not be opening every single chest or bombing every single bombable wall, but I will be maxing out my health, getting the most upgraded gear, acquiring all collectibles, etc. So for Zelda 1, I'll be beating all dungeons, getting all unique items and their upgraded variants, and maxing out my health. With that out of the way, let's kick things off with Zelda 1. After moseying around in the overworld, I made my way over to the first of many dungeons that I'll be completing in this challenge. And I died in it. Not a great start. For those of you unfamiliar with these first two Zelda games I'll be completing on the NES, these games are brutally difficult, like controller spiking, TV smashing kind of difficult. Nintendo has gotten pretty soft with their games' difficulty in recent history, trying to appeal to as many people as possible. But back in the day, you had to earn your victories with these games, and the early Zelda entries were no exception. Granted, I was being a bit careless in this first dungeon and was trying to go too fast, which led to my death, but you'll see how crazy this game gets later on in the video. Also, by the way, I won't be using any save states throughout these 14 days. So if I die at any point, I can't just reload a save state seconds before I died. So once I had my wits about me, I made it to the pregnant unicorn monster, knocked it out, and put the first dungeon in the books. I then quickly made it to dungeon 2 and knocked it out with no issues at all. I actually played this game all the way through for this channel not too long ago, so I knew pretty much exactly where I needed to go in order to progress. In addition to being super difficult, this game is pretty cryptic at times, so this knowledge I had going into it was super helpful for me. Don't get me wrong though, whenever I found myself being stuck by any stretch of the imagination, I would shamelessly consult the Zelda Wiki to look up where I needed to go. And prior to this challenge, I actually made a 100+ page Word document I referenced off to the side that acted as a step-by-step guide for every 2D Zelda game stating exactly what I needed to collect in order to 100% these games as quickly as possible. So long story short, I came prepared and had a game plan ahead of time. So after beating Dungeon 2, I did some scavenging around the overworld for some collectibles. I bombed a lone rock to get a heart container, bombed another wall to get a second heart container, and bought a blue candle and used that candle to burn a tree to get a third additional heart container. These 3 heart containers are all required to get for my 100% run, but are optional for casual players trying to beat the game. Now I could have obtained them anytime I wanted to throughout my playthrough, as long as I had the items needed to get them, being the bombs and blue candle in this case. You'll see this throughout my entire journey of playing these games, but I generally try to obtain these collectibles that count towards my 100% completion as soon as possible. This is because with more hearts and upgraded gear, I'm allowed to play more recklessly, and can finish each game faster, allowing myself to have a greater chance of completing this 14-day gauntlet. Also, it was really helpful that I obtained this extra health because the 3rd dungeon in this game is quite a bit more challenging compared to the first 2. There's a crap ton of these Dark Nut guys that are annoying to kill and can tear through your health like it's nothing if you're not careful. But before I knew it, I obtained the dungeon item of the raft and made my way into the Manhandla boss fight with only 3 hearts remaining. After one cleverly placed bomb, I knocked out 3 of its heads at once, and after some juking and another perfectly placed bomb, I killed it without taking any damage at all, putting dungeon 3 in the books. Also, during my playthrough of this dungeon, there was an old man that asked if I got the sword from an old man on top of the waterfall. This is of course referencing the old man that gives Link the white sword, an upgraded sword that deals more damage compared to the starting one. I actually won't be getting that sword during my playthrough. This is because there's actually a sword in the game more powerful than the white sword, the magical sword, which you're not able to obtain until you acquire 12 or more heart containers. The white sword isn't required in my 100% run because it would just replace the magical sword anyway when I got the magical sword later on. I could have obtained the white sword and make some combat sections easier before I got the magical sword, but getting the white sword takes time, so I figured it would just be worth it to upgrade my sword until I could get the most upgraded variants. Probably not the most responsible thing to do, but I really wanted to get ahead in this challenge so that I wouldn't be in a bad position in the last remaining few days with too many games to play and not enough time left. I did, however, purchase the blue ring at this point, which increases your base defense by 2. Similar to the white sword, this blue ring isn't required for 100% completion because it gets replaced by the red ring, which multiplies your base defense by 4. I went ahead and bought the blue ring as a safety strat because you're only able to obtain the red ring until you get to the very last dungeon of the game, level 9. I'll be playing some extremely difficult dungeons until I get to level 9, so I caved and snatched up the blue ring. Also, I spent some time stopping by a couple of friendly moblins to get the 250 rupees needed to purchase the item. So with that, I used my raft and sailed over to level 4. Dungeon 4 wasn't too difficult. My health stayed pretty high during most of it, where I never dipped below half health until I got to the dungeon's boss, Gleeok. My health had me somewhat nervous going into this fight, but I took him down with 1.5 hearts left, obtained the heart container, and warped back to the overworld after collecting the next piece of the Triforce. From here, my options opened up quite a bit as to what my next course of action could be. With the raft, I sailed over to an island to obtain another heart container. Also, interesting note for these hidden heart containers that you can choose between getting a red potion. These heart containers are actually permanently missable if you choose a red potion instead of the heart container, so be careful what you choose if you're going for 100% completion. The red potion is nowhere close to being as valuable as the heart container, so I would honestly question your life decisions if you choose the red potion instead, but just keep that bit of information in your mind for whatever reason if you decide to take on this challenge yourself. So from here, I traveled south a bit and used a stepladder I got from level 4 to get another heart container, bringing my total heart container count to 12, meeting the threshold to obtain the magical sword. So with no time to waste, I went straight to the graveyard, pushed a random grave, jumped down said grave, and wriggled the sword off a talking corpse to quadruple my damage output. From here, I traveled a short distance to obtain the power bracelet from under an Armo statue. I got this item for the sole purpose of 100%ing this game, where I didn't even use it to help me out on my quest. You're supposed to use it to help you fast travel around the overworld, but because the overworld is pretty small anyway, and quite frankly because I didn't feel like researching how fast traveling in this game works, I decided not to use it. So with a few more goodies added to my arsenal, I made my way over to level 5. Level 5 was the most challenging dungeon so far at this point, but it was no match for my fully upgraded sword and blue ring, where I stayed almost at full health for the majority of it. Things started to get hairy when I got to this room with these Dodongos though. In order to progress to the adjacent room, I needed to kill all 3 of them by putting bombs in their mouths, but I only had 7 bombs, and I would need 6 total bombs to kill all of them, so I could only let 1 bomb go to waste. It's super easy to get juked by one of these guys and have them move out of the way at the last second to not eat my bomb. Also, what's worse is that if I ran out of bombs in this room, I would have to backtrack to previous rooms to spend a bunch of extra time grinding for bombs so that I would have a chance to kill the Dodongos again. I was super careful and was 2 bombs away before victory until I made a major blunder and wasted one of my bombs. So I had to have these last 2 bombs hit their mark. The first one hit its target, and so did the second one, with 0 bombs left to spare. What a relief. Also, what's a bit of a slap in the face is that later on in the dungeon, You're able to purchase a bomb upgrade to hold 12 bombs instead of 8, which would have been a heck of a lot more helpful if I could purchase that before I had to fight 3 whole Dodongos with my tiny bomb bag. But I was able to make it through without being set back, so I guess I can't really complain. Eventually, I made it to the boss of the dungeon, which was a complete joke and goes down as one of the easiest bosses in all of Zelda. You play your recorder next to it, and with only 2 slashes with a magical sword, it was toast. After exiting the dungeon, I stopped by an old man who are quite plentiful in this game evidently, and obtained the letter item. I obtained this item for the sole purpose of checking off a 100% completion requirement, where showing this to an old woman allows Link to purchase healing potions from her. So without hesitation, I traveled a few screens over, bombed a wall, and showed her the letter to unlock the shop. I didn't actually buy any potions though, because they're non-permanent upgrades, so not required for 100% completion. I went to a hidden shop and spent my rupees on some meat instead. After acquiring some meat, I played my recorder in front of some water to unlock perhaps the most well-hidden dungeon in the game, level 7. For all the dungeons in this game up until this point, I tackled them in their numbered order because on average, the dungeon difficulties scale with their respective numbers. But I decided to play level 6 towards the end of my quest because that is, in my opinion, the second hardest dungeon in the game, with the hardest being the final dungeon at level 9. Level 7 also has the second and final bomb upgrade, which allows Link to hold 16 bombs. So I decided to take on level 7 earlier on so that I would have a solid supply of bombs for level 6, 8, and 9. Level 7 was not bad at all, really. I laid my meat down in front of a hungry gentleman with a mustache to progress, and the double bomb bag upgrade was super helpful in this dungeon because there were a lot of Dodongos to fight here. Before I knew it though, I made it to the boss, which is, the level 1 boss? Not sure what the devs were thinking here. Either way, I knocked it out with 2 sword beams and put level 7 in the books. From here, I made it to one of the dungeons that I was dreading the most, level 6. And boy oh boy was this dread justified based on what I had to go through. Things started out okay. I killed some Wizrobes to get a key and unlocked the door to see an old man give me a hint on how to defeat Goma. But there was another locked door blocking my path, and for the life of me, I couldn't find another key in this dungeon. I tried bombing some walls and pushing blocks to see if I could unlock some sort of hidden area, but nothing. I'm almost positive this dungeon doesn't give you enough keys to complete it if you enter with 0. So I had to waste precious time to leave the dungeon, go to a shop, and purchase a key for 80 rupees to use in Dungeon 6. That's the one thing that doesn't really make any sense in this game. Apparently all locked doors in this game are universal, where any key from any dungeon or shop can unlock any locked door present in the game. I think in the past when I played this game, I just had one extra key from one of the previous dungeons to use in level 6, which prevented me from needing to purchase the key from the shop. But let me know in the comments if you know some mysterious key in level 6 that I missed for whatever reason. So with my purchased key in hand, I made my way deeper into the dungeon, and after not too long, I died. Twice. The problem with this dungeon is that it's littered with these Wizrobes and their stupid looking Cheerio mouths and magical death rays. Even with the blue ring, one of their magical attacks takes a whole 2 hearts away. If I was responsible, I probably should have purchased the magical shield, which can block the magic attacks. But after buying the key, I didn't exactly have many rupees at my disposal, and grinding for rupees in order to purchase this magical shield seemed like it would waste too much time. So after 2 more attempts in this dungeon, I made some more progress and was blessed with a stopwatch that froze all the enemies in a particularly difficult room, which was super helpful because I needed to kill all of them in that room in order to progress further. All was going well and good, and I even made it to the boss of the dungeon until I made a critical mistake. Goma requires shots from your bow to take down, and I obtained the bow from level 1 a while back, but I totally forgot, like unlike most Zelda games, you actually have to buy the arrows item from an item shop in addition to obtaining the bow item in order to shoot arrows with the bow. So I had to purposely drain Link's health, buy the arrows for 80 rupees, and go all the way back to Goma after making my way through those jam-packed rooms with Wizrobes to take on the boss again. The boss was easy to kill once I had the bow and arrow, but this extra trek I had to perform definitely left a sour taste in my mouth. So once that was over, I made my way straight over to level 8, the second to last dungeon I would have to tackle. This dungeon was certainly difficult, but nothing compared to level 6. So far in this challenge, I was playing each dungeon by memory and not looking up the correct route online. And by random chance, I actually made my way into the boss chamber super early on before even getting the dungeon map or compass. So once taking out Gleeok with more heads this time around, I had to go back in the dungeon to get the dungeon map and compass to count towards 100% completion. I didn't say this earlier, but for all the dungeons and all the Zelda games I'll be playing in this challenge, I'll be counting the dungeon map and compass as being required for 100% completion. These weren't very difficult to collect here though, so in no time, I made my way back to the overworld. From here, I decided to grind for rupees a little bit until I purchased the upgraded shield, which I could finally afford. So with fully maxed out health and upgraded gear, I made my way into the final dungeon, level 9. And boy oh boy was this dungeon a gauntlet alright. It's the largest and most complicated dungeon in the game by far, with its challenging enemies and staircases leading to various parts of it. After not long into trying to navigate it, I ended up dying, and for the first time in this challenge, I decided to just pull up a guide of the dungeon on the side that showed exactly where I needed to go in order to get through it. I wouldn't say this is cheating, because the guide is pretty much required to 100% this game anyway, and I have to play through so much Zelda in these next 14 days or so that I think it can be justified. Apparently as a means of retaliating against me trying to take the easy way out though, the game threw a like at me that ate my newly acquired magical shield. I already bought it once, so I don't think needing to buy it again after losing it should count towards 100% completion. Also, another devastating thing happened in this dungeon. I was on the path to get the red ring upgrade when I got totally destroyed by Wizrobes, where they seemed almost untouchable as I slowly lost more and more health. The staircase in the center of the room leads directly to the red ring, so dying here would require me to tread the same long path all the way to this room again. And so as I desperately tried to stop the Wizrobe wave of destruction, I slowly watched my health go all the way from a little over half depleted all the way to 0 hearts in just a matter of 30 seconds. But after another attempt, I was able to make it through the room that took me out previously, and I obtained the red ring, quadrupling my base defense. And before long, I also found the silver arrows after defeating enemies that were no match against my unstoppable force that is the red ring. And then I made it to the final fight against Ganon with only 5 hearts remaining. I was a little nervous about my health going into this fight, but after 4 lucky sword stabs, I stunned Ganon and used my silver arrows to turn him into an exploding splotch of nacho cheese Dorito dust. And with that, I 100% completed Zelda 1 in only about 3.5 hours of total playtime. So without further ado, next up, we have one of the most challenging and disliked Zelda entries to 100% next. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link for the NES. When I first thought of taking on this challenge, Zelda 2 was the one game that I dreaded playing the most. It's just as cryptic as Zelda 1, but its combat sections are the real kicker. Using a guide helped me navigate the tricky dungeons of Zelda 1, but no guide will trivialize the challenging core gameplay that is present in Zelda 2. And remember, I won't be using any save states during any point in my playthrough. So with as much hope as I could muster, I registered my name and started the adventure. So what is required to 100% Zelda 2? Well, believe it or not, the amount of collectibles in this game are quite a bit lower than most games in this challenge. I have to beat all palace dungeons, max out my health and magic meter by picking up all hearts and magic containers, and acquire all spells, attack moves, and dungeon items. This game also introduces a level up experience system similar to JRPGs, so I will also have to upgrade my life, magic, and attack stats to the maximum level of level 8. I will also have to collect all these things called Link Dolls, which act as 1-ups to give you another life before getting game over. The speedrun.com rules don't list the Link Dolls as being required to collect, but I decided to try and pick all of them up because there's a limited supply to collect in-game, with only 6 of them being present. So with that out of the way, let's get started on our quest. The early game went pretty standard. I collected some point experience bags to increase my health, crossed a bridge of murderous bubbles, got a spell from a pulsating beard man, took damage in the middle of my animation of picking up a heart container, and before I knew it, I made my way to the first palace of the game. In standard first dungeon fashion, this is by far the easiest dungeon in the game. I lost all my health one time, but I did not lose all of my lives or game over, which is the only real detriment that matters in Zelda 2. That is because when you lose all of your lives and get game over, you start all the way back at the starting area and have to trudge all the way back to where you lost your last life to continue trying to make progress. This mechanic of the game is the source of a lot of people's frustrations with Zelda 2, and the major amount of time loss it can potentially create made me nervous in this 14-day challenge for sure. So after spelunking in the first palace and increasing my magic and life levels after killing more enemies, I found the dungeon item of the candle and made sure not to kill the boss and to not place the crystal in the statue at the end of the dungeon. This was intentional in order to help myself reach max levels for life, magic, and attack as quickly as possible later on. How leveling works in this game is that towards the beginning, you will increase your levels quickly because the amount of experience needed to progress through the early levels is quite low, requiring no more than 500 experience points to progress past the first 3 levels. However, as you level up, you will find the amount of experience points that you need to progress to the next level will exponentially increase, with some of the later levels requiring thousands of experience points to reach. The highest amount of experience points needed to increase a level, for example, is attack level 8, which requires 8,000 whole experience points. Also, what's even crazier is that whenever you progress to the next level for a certain attribute, your experience points will go back to 0 again, requiring you to earn exponentially more experience points each time you want to level up a future attribute. Also, another thing that sucks is that if you game over at any point, which equates to losing 3 lives, your experience will go all the way back to 0, requiring you to grind up all the way back to the amount of experience you previously had. Luckily though, there is a way to cheese this experience system to get max levels somewhat easily. After beating a palace and placing the crystal in the statue, you will automatically be gifted enough experience points to level up an attribute. So after clearing most of the palace and getting the dungeon item, you could not place the crystal, come back later on in the game and place the crystal once you're at a point where killing enemies the normal way will take ages to level yourself up. So I set a goal for myself. There are 6 palaces that you can level up by placing crystals, so I decided to get all 3 of my attributes to level 6 by killing enemies the normal way and collecting point bags. And for the last 2 level ups for each attribute, I would kill the boss of each palace and place the stone to get max level with ease. So with the game plan put into place, I left the first palace without placing the crystal. I then acquired an easy to nab magic container, and went spelunking in a cave to get an angel statue, or trophy. The American localized Zelda games really do try to remove religious references from their games, don't they? And then I progressed through a cave and somehow made it out with 0 magic and 0 health. Look at this madness. I didn't even know this was possible. Like if a moblin so much as sneezes on Link in this state, he's done for. But luckily, there was a place to get healed by a fairy directly next to the cave exit. Also nearby, I even traveled through a swamp and picked up my first Link doll to bring my total life count to 4 instead of the standard 3. But this little victory was short-lived because just a few minutes later, I talked to an old woman who suddenly transformed into a purple monster, and I lost all my health and died, wasting my Link doll. This game, man, this game. I swear though, the 1-up Link dolls in this game are way too hard to find, and are in too small of a supply for how useful they actually are. It's so easy to die in this game, with the main culprit being bottomless pits. During sword combat with enemies, your health slowly will drain as you get hit, but with bottomless pits, even if you're full of energy at full health and magic, with just one wrong jump over the bubble bridge, you can kiss one of your lives goodbye. And it's absurd that there's only 6 Link dolls in this game. Most of them are extremely well hidden, only able to be found by walking on a single tile in the overworld, and you're more likely to lose a life trying to get the thing. So after heading in this village again and avoiding the purple monster in disguise, I learned my favorite spell in the game, Life, which heals the player at the expense of losing some of their magic. This spell is super useful because it's really the only way to heal yourself, since enemies don't drop hearts like they do in standard Zelda games. They drop magic instead. So theoretically, you could just get hit, use a life spell, pick up magic from defeated enemies, and be self-sustained, if it wasn't for bottomless pits. Those have nothing on the life spell. So from here, I made it to a lot of people's first large hurdle while playing this game, Death Mountain. Death Mountain is essentially a maze with dead ends and challenging enemies, but since I played this game before for this channel, I actually knew exactly what path to take to get through it. That didn't stop it from being very challenging though. On my first attempt, I actually managed to get to the cave that contains the hammer item, which would allow me to unlock a shortcut to alleviate the need to progress through the mountain's winding cave system again. So with 1 life left before game over, I entered the cave. And long story short, I played very poorly. There was this red tomahawk throwing guy at the entrance, and I thought the hammer item was located just past the guy, so I wasted a lot of my health trying to jump over him instead of playing it slow and killing him. I barely made it to the next room with basically 0 health and magic and encountered these floppy fish creatures. I took these slow and knocked them out without any issues, but came face to face with yet another tomahawk madman. Look at how it played out. I got game over and had to start all the way back at the beginning palace and retrace my steps to progress through Death Mountain the same way I came. So with my wits about me, I made it to Death Mountain again with the hammer on the horizon. I made it to the last cave containing the hammer again, and made some more progress in it until my health got drained again and I was on my last life. With a bit more progress, I made it to the final enemy before the hammer item with no magic and only 1 tiny bar of health left. This is how it played out. The jump spell came in clutch and I got the hammer, and then I killed Link to reset my lives counter. With the hammer, I took a shortcut past Death Mountain and got another magic container, increasing my maximum magic capacity. From here, I did a few more miscellaneous things required for 100%. I got a heart container from a cave, got a point bag to help me get more experience, and walked on a random tile on the overworld to obtain my second Link doll. I then made my way over to a village and learned the down stab attack, which was a major game changer for me combat-wise. Previously, whenever I wanted to avoid a particularly difficult enemy that I did not want to fight, I would just use the jump spell to try and jump over it, oftentimes taking damage in the process. But with the down stab ability, you can just pogo across hordes of enemies like it's nothing. Avoiding enemies like this was especially beneficial for me in this challenge, because it was a method to save time. Avoiding enemies could only get me so far in my playthrough though, because killing enemies is essential to level up, and leveling up is essential to being able to bypass tough enemies that stand in my way. So I only really avoided enemies when they were a particular pain to take down. From here, I trudged through the swamp towards Palace number 2, and made some progress through it until I obtained the handy glove item. Yes, even this hard as balls game wasn't object to using puns. After obtaining what I wanted in this palace, I decided to grind for experience points for 30 to 40 minutes or so, until all my attributes were at level 5. I did this because I was expecting the coming dungeons to be rather difficult, and I didn't have the benefit of increasing my levels at the end of each dungeon, because I wanted to save those level ups for later. What I would do is exit the second palace and re-enter to get the magic from the armored statue, fight some enemies towards the entrance of the palace, and when my health got a bit low, I would use a life spell and just repeat those steps. With this technique, leveling up didn't take too long, where every once in a while, one of those scaly guys that I would fight would drop a point bag worth a whopping 200 experience points, and I was quite lucky with getting these point bag drops. So once I was satisfied with my levels, I made my way over to the third palace in the game, Island Palace. Immediately upon entering this next palace, I decided to do some more grinding to make my experience with the remaining palaces a bit easier. I went ahead and grinded for 1500 experience points to get level 6 health and 3000 more experience points to get level 6 attack. I would say health and attack are probably the most two important attributes to level up, with your attack being the number one most beneficial. Some enemies can take ages to defeat if your attack isn't up to par. That being said, even magic has its perks with allowing you to cast more spells, so I wouldn't really neglect any of the three. So your best bet is probably keeping each of the three roughly around the same level. So with my upgraded health and attack, the rest of the palace was pretty much a breeze. I didn't place the crystal or fight the boss yet for reasons I stated earlier, but I did get the raft item so that I could progress to other areas of the overworld map. So I sailed across the ocean and found 2 point bags, one worth 200 points and one worth 500 points, being a huge help in getting me to my goal of max levels. I made sure to collect these when I had full lives though, because if you game over after collecting one of these point bags and before leveling up, all of your experience gets erased and the point bags don't respawn, which is a huge bummer. I then made my way to a nearby town to get the fire spell, which I don't think I even used once during my playthrough, and just obtained for 100% completion's sake. Apparently allows you to shoot fire from your sword, but I didn't actually bother to test it out. I then did some more walking around the overworld, and found my third Link doll, obtained a magic container item, and obtained a kidnapped child item? Not sure why Link holds this kid up like he's a handy glove or a bundle of wood, but who am I to judge? I then made my way to the mountain town of Darunia, and dove down a chimney like Santa Claus to get the upward thrust sword technique. I think it's pretty absurd that the devs expected players to see this chimney and think, oh, a chimney? Let me down it like Mario and see what's down there. This sword technique actually isn't required to beat the game, which is how it should be, and I actually didn't even use this sword technique much at all, where the down thrust is a heck of a lot more helpful. Also, I returned the kidnapped kid to his rightful home, and learned the reflect spell, which is required at only one spot in the game, which I'll touch on later. So without any delay, from here, I made my way straight over to the 4th palace of the game. In this palace, I obtained the kinky boots and got my magic to level 6. So at this point, I could just beat each of the 6 palaces to get all my skills to level 8, without needing to worry about collecting point bags, grinding for experience, or even killing enemies in general, where the only required enemies to defeat at this point were bosses. So after some more progress in this dungeon, I made it to the boss, which was trivialized with my reflect spell. I mean seriously, all you have to do to defeat the guy is stand at the edge of your screen, use your reflect spell, crouch, and he's toast in a matter of seconds. So once he was defeated, I placed the crystal and leveled up my health, where the first palace that I completed in this game was actually the 4th one that I entered. From here, I went on a rampage of mercilessly destroying the first 3 dungeons with my overpowered abilities. Cue the destruction montage. With the first 4 dungeons completed, I only had 2 more level ups until I was leveled up to the max. So without any delay, I walked across the water with my newly acquired boots, picked up a magic container just chilling in the middle of an ocean, and made my way to the 5th palace of the game. With my sudden extreme increase in levels, this palace had nothing on me, as I progressed through it pretty easily, and before I knew it, I knocked out Shrek and increased my magic to its maximum level. I then did a few things required for 100%. I obtained Link Doll number 4 hidden deep in the swamp, snatched up a heart container by walking on a specific tile along the shoreline, and used my hammer on a specific tile to unlock a hidden village. Geez, this game has a strange obsession with hiding things on singular tiles to make them as hard as possible for players to find without looking stuff up. In this hidden village, I was able to do quite a bit of things. I went into an old lady's basement to drink some of her magic. Wow, that sounds very wrong out of context. Learn the spell from an old man. Yes, the spell. Apparently Nintendo ran out of creative spell names at this point in the game. And used the spell at the outskirts of the village to unlock a chamber where I obtained a magical key that can be used to unlock doors in a limited number of times, rendering regular keys useless. Once I obtained all these goodies, I entered the 6th palace, the palace before the final palace of the game. Despite me having super good equipment going into this dungeon, there was a lot of BS here that was annoying to play through. For one, there's this one invisible section with an invisible hole in the ground. You're meant to fall down this hole the first time, and then memorize where it's located so that you can use your jump spell to get across the other side. At first, I thought I was being big-brained, and decided to use my fairy spell to fly across the room, so that I wouldn't have to memorize exactly where the invisible pit was. But by the time I flew across the long room, I realized that apparently you need your sword to break the blocks on the other side. So I had to fly all the way back to the beginning of the room to turn back into Link, and use the jump spell to get across. If you're not supposed to use the fairy to get across the room, I feel like the game should have told me that before I wasted my time and magic flying across the room and back again. And the glitter on the turd is that right around this time, I was jumping across some gaps when this flying dinosaur head thing just yeeted me into a bottomless pit, wasting one of my precious lives. And I had pretty full health too, but it was bye-bye in a blink of an eye. At some point in the dungeon, I did obtain a Link Doll, but it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because I lost quite a large number of lives anyway. After progressing more and more though, I finally made my way to the boss, which was super scary to fight because there were bottomless pits all around. And once you fall in one, you either start back at the beginning of the boss fight with it at full health again, or you game over if you run out of lives and have to start all the way back at the starting area of the game. I took the fight super slow and careful though, and I was able to knock out the dragon without having to worry about starting the fight over again. So with the crystal placed, I obtained over 6,000 experience points almost instantly, and raised my final skill attribute of attack to its max level of 8. From here, I learned the final spell in the game of the Thunder Spell from an old man and mentally prepare myself for the most arduous journey in the game yet, the trek through the Valley of Death to the final dungeon in the game, the Great Palace. I knew how difficult this area of the game was from playing it in the past, so I knew I had to focus up and make sure not to die in any stupid ways. I made it through a couple of combat areas relatively unscathed until something insane happened. I paused the game when I was hovering above the lava. All I needed to do was cast the fairy spell immediately upon pausing the game, and I could fly to safety. And I was unsuccessful, wasting one of my lives because I got greedy and tried to jump over the lava pit with enemies flying all around. And not soon after this, I had another dumb death and got knocked into the lava with almost full health and magic. So I only had one life left before game over, and I was just over halfway through the Valley of Death, so I still had a long way to go. So I really needed to focus up here. For the next few combat areas, I decided to use a fairy to fly over pits as a safety strat to not lose any more lives. I had so much magic anyway that I could use the fairy 3 times or so before I ran out of magic. This technique worked out really well, but I still naturally sustained some damage passing through some of the toughest enemies in the game. Eventually, I made it to the last room before reaching the final dungeon with only 2 bars of health. And I was successful, barely making it out alive. Also, what's great is that once entering this final palace, if I game over to any point here, I would start from the beginning of this dungeon, and would not spawn at the starting palace. This last area is anything but a piece of cake though, where I can confidently call this the most challenging dungeon in the game and the most difficult dungeon in the entire Zelda franchise. This is the Great Palace. When I first tried playing this dungeon back in the day, I tried to complete it without a guide, and even after hours of trial and error of progressing through winding corridors that would oftentimes just dead end or loop back around to the previous areas of the dungeon, I still ended up just caving in and looking up the correct path to get through it. The enemies are so tough to defeat, even with all of Link's skill attributes at max level, and during my 100% playthrough of this game for this video, I ended up just trying to bypass every single enemy that I came across with the pogo down thrust attack because they were too difficult to take down normally. Eventually, I did make it to a room that had the 6th and final Link doll, so once it was obtained, I collected all that I needed, where the only thing left was taking out the final boss. And after a lot of focus and quite a bit of deaths, I finally made it to Thunderbird's lair. I used my jump spell to allow myself to reach the boss easier with my sword attacks, shield spell to increase my defense, and thunder spell to make the boss vulnerable to my attacks. After only about 30 seconds or so of dancing around raining fireballs, I was able to take Thunderbird down, but the game was not over yet. There was still one true final boss to take down, Link's doppelganger, Dark Link, which I cheesed by crouch stabbing in a corner until he was defeated. Yeah, not the most climactic ending to such a challenging game, but the NES Zelda lineup was complete. Zelda 2, the most challenging Zelda game out there, while simultaneously being the Zelda game packed with arguably the most BS. I mean seriously, some of the deaths in this playthrough made me super annoyed with how cheap they were, but despite this, I actually 100%ed Zelda 2 quicker than I thought I would, where it only took me a total of about 5 hours to complete. Also, based on my completed save file, I only game over 10 times. I honestly think that this was pretty good, because a lot of my game overs were a result of me purposely draining all of Link's lives to get a fresh set of 3, and not necessarily a result of me just sucking and losing all my lives accidentally. So that's Zelda 2. I was super pumped to put this game in the past, because now I could actually play Zelda games that I enjoy a lot, where for the next game to 100%, we have The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and I was able to start A Link to the Past on the first day of the challenge still. With 20% of the games completed so early into my run, I felt like I was on a really good pace. Or so I thought at the time. Little did I fully realize how brutally long some of the later games would be. So, what is required to 100% complete A Link to the Past? Well, we obviously have to do all things that are required to beat the game, such as obtaining all dungeon items and beating all dungeons, but we also have to obtain all 20 heart containers, obtain all optional items such as all 4 bottles, Magic Cape, Cane of Burna, and we also have to obtain all item upgrades such as the most upgraded sword, upgraded magic meter, etc. Speedrun.com does not require players to get the fully upgraded quiver or bomb bag for the 100% category, because it's incredibly tedious and annoying to obtain, but I'll be doing that anyway because I think it should count towards 100%. I will also be obtaining the dungeon map and compass for each dungeon, because these 2 items are of a limited supply, so I think they should count as well. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the adventure. I will say that I've probably played A Link to the Past the most times out of any Zelda game out there, so naturally, I had the overworld map almost completely memorized. This made things a lot more smooth sailing for me because I rarely had to consult a guide to look up where I needed to go next. I really only ever used a guide to locate particularly hidden collectibles needed for 100% completion. The beginning of the adventure went pretty standard. I broke into Hyrule Castle, ripped the sword off a lifeless corpse of a blue-haired man, and found myself crawling out of the royal sewers with Princess Zelda. You know, standard Zelda stuff. Once out in the open, you can actually obtain quite a bit of items to get closer to the 100% completion status, despite not even entering the first real dungeon of the game yet. I got some pieces of hearts, bought a magic bottle off the black market, and talked to Dora the Explorer to get a bug catching net. I also went ahead and obtained a second magic bottle in Kakariko Village and bombed a hole in a tiny house to unlock a hidden area where I could obtain bombs and arrows. I decided to go in here because I didn't have any bombs and needed some to obtain some heart pieces, but this house can actually be used to acquire unlimited bombs and arrows if you keep leaving and re-entering it. I did not use it for that purpose, but it was there if I needed it. I also went ahead and picked a mysterious mushroom in the forest and gave it to a witch to obtain the magic powder, which will be essential to unlock more secrets later on in the game. After doing as much as I could with the items currently at my disposal, I made my way over to the first dungeon of the game. I would say this dungeon was super easy, being the first dungeon in the game and all, but I actually died about midway through it after getting the bow item, believe it or not. This wasn't because the dungeon was hard or anything. I was just trying to speed through it, and that woefully resulted in my depleted health. Eventually though, I took down the boss and put the first dungeon in the books. Out in the overworld, I got the Pegasus boots from Sahasrara, which opened up the amount of items I could collect by quite a large margin. I was a naughty boy and ran into some bookcases to get a book and obtained a couple more heart pieces. One of the heart pieces resulted in a fish out of water, so I did the only logical thing to save it and brought it to the bottle salesman in Kakariko Village for some random goodies. Was the fish expedition required to beat the game? Nope. Was it even required for 100% completion? Nope. I just read somewhere that giving this guy a fish unlocks some special dialogue, so I decided to test it out because I was intrigued. This challenge is just me playing Zelda for days on end. I need some way to keep myself entertained during all this. I also made a stop by Lake Hylia to get 300 rupees from a thief. You don't really need that many rupees in a casual playthrough of A Link to the Past to beat the game the normal way, but you need a crazy amount of rupees in order to max out your quiver and bomb bag capacities. There's an area at the center of Lake Hylia called a Pond of Happiness that you can throw rupees into, where the more rupees you throw in, the more bombs and areas you can hold. In order to max out your capacities, you need to throw in a total of 1,400 rupees, more than you can even hold at once. So I would need to visit the pond multiple times throughout my playthrough before my wallet gets full to most efficiently get 100% completion. So after getting my wallets close to full capacity, I obtained the Ice Rod item, which is actually not required until towards the very end of the game, and obtained another heart piece until I made it to the second dungeon of the game. Nothing too special happened in this dungeon, except I did obtain another heart piece. You can probably tell from what I've discussed already, but this game has a lot more collectibles required for 100% completion compared to the two NES Zelda entries. So after taking out the flying caterpillars, I exited the dungeon and began another expedition across Hyrule picking up items required for 100% completion. I purchased the flippers, which increased the amount of areas that I could progress, wrestled a homeless man under a bridge for an empty jar of baked beans, and eventually made my way over to the third dungeon of the game, the dungeon before I'm able to freely access the Dark World. The dungeon itself went well enough until I came across one of the infamously challenging bosses in Zelda, Moldorm. You're supposed to slash at its tail until it's defeated, but if you get knocked off to the floor below, you have to restart the boss fight over again with the boss at full health again. I smacked it around a few times until it was one hit away from being defeated, until I was so close to getting knocked off the edge of the arena. Like, look at how close I was to getting knocked off here. Moldorm's body covered more than half of Link's body as he was pushed right up against the edge of the arena. I definitely deserved to fall off here, but I did not fall off, and with one more slash to the tail, the boss was destroyed. I then obtained the Master Sword, and stormed into Hyrule Castle in a build-up to take on the wizard Aghanim. The build-up to this fight was essentially a gauntlet of rooms full of enemies I had to take down, which were trivialized due to the Master Sword's ability to shoot sword beams when Link is at full health. Like, just look at this. These guys don't even stand a chance. Eventually, I made my way into Aghanim's chamber, and after a civilized game of ping pong, I destroyed him but got dragged into the Dark World. The Dark World housed a few goodies I was able to collect with the items I had at my disposal at the moment, where I got a heart piece and threw a rock in a circle of rocks to get the Quake Medallion. You saw it here, folks. A Link to the Past did it before Breath of the Wild even dreamed of doing it. From here, I paid a monkey toll and gained access to the next dungeon of the game, the first Dark World dungeon. Now at this point, I was clocked in at playing Zelda for almost 10.5 hours for the day, and I was pretty worn out. The extreme difficulty and large amounts of concentration needed for the two challenging NES Zelda games really took a toll on me, so I decided it was time to throw in the towel for the day. I definitely could have pressed on longer, but with 13 more potential days ahead of me, I knew I had to approach this challenge with a marathon mindset, and not burn myself out on the first day pulling an all-nighter playing Zelda. So with that, I decided to continue in the morning. Starting with the morning of the first day, I continued where I left off in A Link to the Past and played through the first Dark World dungeon. I don't know if I was in the wrong headspace or what for this dungeon, or if I wasn't in my Zelda groove after resting for the night, but it ended up being the hardest dungeon in the game for me for whatever reason. I had a hard time knowing where to go, where it didn't help that I tried taking it on without consulting a guide because I thought I knew the game well enough. There's a decent amount of required backtracking in this dungeon, and you're also required to be cognizant of what's on the floors above and below you, in order to do things such as push a block to a lower floor to unlock a secret. But before I knew it, I obtained the hammer, took out the boss, and put this dungeon in the books. Once in the overworld, I smashed some pegs with my hammer and opened up the amount of possible routes I could take dramatically. I got some heart pieces, dug up a flute, and unlocked the fast travel ability by playing a flute next to Weathervane in Kakariko Village. I made sure to unlock this fast traveling ability as soon as possible, because it makes maneuvering around the overworld a lot faster compared to running around it with the Pegasus boots. I also sprinkled some magic dust on an altar to get a magic meter upgrade, and made my way to the village of outcasts to play a chess minigame to try to obtain a heart piece. If there was one aspect that I hated the most about the Zelda games I played for this challenge, it was rewards dictated by RNG like this. In this chess minigame, you pay 30 rupees to open a chest, where one of the random prizes you get is a piece of heart. So if I get extremely unlucky, I could technically be playing this minigame for the next few days. But I got pretty lucky with the RNG and was able to obtain my desired reward on just the 4th attempt, which made me super happy. I also decided to take on another minigame where you pay to dig holes, and one of the random things that you can dig up is a piece of heart. So I paid 80 rupees for the first time and started digging holes. I started to get closer and closer to running out of time and thought, oh, that's whatever. I wasn't expecting to get the heart piece on my first attempt anyway, so I guess I'll just have to play this minigame over again. But that thought was short-lived when this happened. I got the piece of heart during the last possible dig with 0 seconds left on the clock. It doesn't even get any closer than that. And on top of that, I made a profit with my rupee count to get even closer to having enough rupees to obtain the Pond of Happiness rewards. Speaking of the Pond of Happiness, I then paid that pond a visit and dumped enough rupees in it to get the maximum capacity for bombs and arrows. I've heard that you can tackle Dark World dungeons relatively out of order in this game, but I decided to take them on in numerical order, because I didn't think I would gain a crazy amount of speed taking on one of the dungeons out of order. So, I made my way over to Dark World Dungeon 2 after draining some floodgates. I think this dungeon was easier puzzle-wise in terms of knowing where to go, but it made me realize that this game is no pushover when it comes to combat, where I couldn't just play recklessly and tank hits from enemies and expect to come out without dying. My health got relatively low in the second Dark World dungeon, but I especially had quite a bit of close calls in Dark World Dungeon 3 that took place in Skull Woods. I was down to 1 heart for a decent amount of it, but somehow did not die, believe it or not. The boss of the dungeon was especially difficult. The most effective attack is using their fire rod from a distance, and being that I obtained the magic meter upgrade, I was able to utilize my fire rod a lot more compared to normal. That didn't stop me from taking a heck of a lot of damage though, where after I ran out of fire rod juice, I used up my last 2 remaining fairies and took out the boss with my sword with only 3 hearts remaining. So from here, I stocked up on some more fairies and entered Dark World Dungeon 4 in the Village of Outcasts, and actually completed it without any real issues. The close calls in the previous dungeon made me alert and careful to not let my health get so low again. I then upgraded my sword to the blacksmith, and then took on the quest in this game that I find the most bizarre. After getting the tempered sword, a chest spawns in the Dark World inside the blacksmith brother's house, and upon inspecting it, you learn that the key is locked inside it, so you cannot open it, but you're allowed to bring the chest with you. If you bring the chest across the overworld and into the light world, you can get a thief to unlock it for you, where a bottle can be found inside. What I find bizarre is why would anyone in the right mind lock a key inside a chest unless they didn't want anyone, including themselves, to be able to access the contents of it. I feel like there would need to be something pretty damning in this chest to justify the key being locked inside it, but there's just a measly empty bottle? That's the most unassuming thing imaginable that could be in the chest. Also, how did Link know there was a key locked inside the chest upon inspecting it? Wouldn't he need some sort of X-ray vision to know that? I don't know, maybe I'm looking too much into it. This quest does raise more questions than answers the more you look into it though. But anyway, I completed my bottle collecting journey after opening the chest. I then got a few more pieces of hearts, getting closer to acquiring all of them, and made my way into Dark World Dungeon 5 Ice Palace. For casual players, this is probably the hardest dungeon in the game, but being that it scarred me with its difficulty the last time I played it, I had its tougher puzzle sections pretty much memorized. The next Dark World dungeon, Misery Mire, also put up quite a bit of a challenge. It was easier than the Ice Palace, but there was a decent amount of non-linearity to it, which required a lot of focus. The boss was laughably easy though, where I just had to stand in the corner and swing my sword until the eyeball monster was defeated. If you played this game before, you may have remembered obtaining the Super Bomb at the very end of the game to unlock the Fairy Fountain on the Pyramid of Power to obtain the silver arrows to be able to defeat Ganon. Well, unlocking the Super Bomb can actually be done at a rather obscure time, where once beating Dark World Dungeon 5 Ice Palace and Dark World Dungeon 6 Misery Mire, you're able to purchase the Super Bomb. So I went into Link's house in the Dark World, purchased the Super Bomb, and I wasted it. Yeah, this thing kinda sucks. Apparently a bomb that costs 100 rupees explodes if you jump off ledges, so you have to waddle your way very slowly to the Pyramid of Power to unlock the Fairy Fountain. After purchasing the Super Bomb for the second time, I entered the Fairy Fountain and tossed in my sword to get the Golden Sword, the most powerful sword in the game, and tossed in my arrows to get the silver arrows. With my upgraded gear, I stormed to the Dark World Dungeon 7 Turtle Rock, and within this dungeon, I got the final piece of heart in the game to get me to 19 total heart containers. This dungeon was also hard as balls in the combat department, where my health was quite low for most of the dungeon. There was actually this little checkpoint with fairies though, that you can load up on infinitely, which came at the perfect time where I only had 2 hearts remaining until I bumped into them. Not long after getting these fairies, I made my way into the boss chamber, defeated quite honestly the most creatively designed boss in the game, and obtained the 20th heart container to get myself to maximum health. At this point in the game, I collected everything needed for 100% completion, except all I needed to do was clear out Ganon's tower, and get the dungeon item of the red mail there, and then defeat Ganon. So once outside of Turtle Rock, I made my way straight over to Ganon's tower located very close by, and entered it knowing that I was on the last stretch before victory. I wouldn't say this final dungeon was that difficult. It was pretty easy to know where to go, but it just took a while because it was so massive with many enemies standing in my way. Even going at a pretty fast pace, it took me over half an hour to beat it. Being armed to the teeth with literally the best gear in the game definitely made my time a lot easier here, where once I obtained the red mail, which quarters the amount of damage Link takes, I was basically unstoppable. Also, with my overpowered golden sword, I was able to 2-shot the Moldworm boss, which you had to refight as a mini-boss. So once I made it through Ganon's tower and took on Aghanim for the second and final time, I jumped into the Pyramid of Power to take on the final fight against Ganon. Ganon would have definitely been the hardest boss fight in the game by far if it wasn't for my immense amount of health and attack power going into the fight. In order to damage Ganon, you're supposed to slash at him with your sword, and my golden sword did wonders against the guy, allowing me to progress through the different stages of the fight with ease. And so in no time, I managed to take out Ganon, watch the credits roll, and 100%ed A Link to the Past, putting this game behind me. All in all, I think this game was definitely easier to 100% complete compared to Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. The RNG minigames were a bit annoying, but due to my good luck, they weren't too big of an issue for me. The combat sections were more difficult than the NES Zelda games, and because I was so familiar with playing A Link to the Past in my younger years, I was super familiar with this game and knew relatively where everything was. It did take me longer to 100% A Link to the Past compared to Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 though, where my time playing A Link to the Past lasted a little over 6.5 hours. But those 6.5 hours honestly flew by, because I was having quite a bit of fun because A Link to the Past is a super enjoyable game. So now we move on to the next game. Next up, we have a fan favorite with one of the best storylines out of any Zelda game out there, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening is the first game in this challenge that caused me to reach a certain conundrum. Which version of the game do I play? Zelda 1, Zelda 2, and A Link to the Past all had a pretty definitive version play, but Link's Awakening actually has 3 versions of the game. There's the original for the Game Boy that was released in 1993, the DX version that was released for the Game Boy Color in 1998, and the Switch remake that was released in 2019. I knew I did not want to play the original version on the Game Boy because the monochrome color palette would make it tougher on the eyes for you guys to watch, so I was initially sold on playing the DX version, which is fully colorized. But I also had the Switch version of the game just lying around gathering dust, which I hadn't played before, and I was looking for a reason to play through it, so I just went ahead and played the Switch version. However, that would be one of the worst decisions I made during this entire challenge. The 2 Game Boy releases are relatively tame in the number of collectibles required for 100% completion. There's your standard heart pieces, and there's even these secret seashells this time around to collect as well. However, there are less collectibles than A Link to the Past, which is a pretty light game in terms of collectibles in its own right. The Switch version of Link's Awakening is a behemoth compared to the 2 previous iterations of the game. It's good that Nintendo added extra content to the game, considering they charged people a whole $60 for it, but it definitely took a big chunk of time I had in the bank for this 14-day challenge. I think explaining what's required for 100% completion is a bit much to discuss all at once right before I play the game, so let's jump into the playthrough and I'll explain what's required as I play the game. Upon waking up in a stranger's bed, I was gifted a shield by Mario and found a sword washed up on the sandy shores of Koholint Island. I then took way too long to try to figure out a block-pushing puzzle to get a piece of heart, and made it to one of the most infamous features of this game, the crane game. Either to add immersion for the player, or out of pure malice, the devs evidently thought it was a good idea to add realistic physics to the crane game, which results in things like this. Or this.
Bye, have a great time!
There are many collectibles that are required to collect in this minigame, which definitely caused me headaches at times. There's a total of 50 secret seashells that need to be collected for 100% completion, where certain secret seashell milestones result in goodies for the player. One of these secret seashells can be caught in the crane game, as well as a piece of heart, where I'll need to collect all pieces of heart in this game to get 20 heart containers. There are also 10 unique figurines of various sizes and shapes that I'll need to collect in the crane game, and distribute in different people's houses in Mabe Village. I actually didn't grind for these figurines until towards the end of my playthrough of this game, so I'll touch on those a little later on. I did go ahead and collect the Yoshi doll, which kicks off the game's trading sequence, and I also got a piece of heart. I also went ahead and tried for a purple rupee worth 50 rupees, but despite it being fully encapsulated in the crane, it just slipped right out like butter. I couldn't even be mad because it was only 50 rupees, but come on, rupees are borderline impossible to catch in this minigame, and aren't even worth going for if I'm being honest. They're just way too tiny for that giant ass crane. After getting scammed out of 50 rupees, I then progressed the trading sequence a little bit further by obtaining the ribbon, and then the dog food, and then made a pit stop to the fishing pond minigame. For better or for worse, has been expanded upon relative to the Game Boy version, where there's more variety of fish this time around, different types of lures to unlock, as well as various other prizes. The fishing is actually pretty easy in the early game, but it does ramp up in difficulty quite a bit towards the end of the game. I went ahead and caught some fish to get 2 pieces of heart, a new type of lure called the middleweight lure, which essentially lets your lure sink deeper into the water, and fished out an empty bottle. I then got bananas after giving dog food to an alligator to eat. Whatever, you do you buddy, no one's judging. And then I made it to the first dungeon of the game, Tail Cave. Just like how I did with A Link to the Past, for each dungeon that I play through, I'll be obtaining the dungeon map, compass, and dungeon item. For Link's Awakening, I also decided to open up every single chest in all the dungeons, as well as explore every single room. There were 2 reasons for this. For one, the game actually tracks what rooms you explored and how many chests are left in each dungeon. The second thing is that I needed to collect all the rupees I could possibly muster for yet another 100% completion criteria that is controversial to exist in the game, to say the least. Dampé's Chamber Dungeons. There are 14 of these things called Chamber Stones in the game, which allow you to complete dungeon challenges in Dampé's Shack. These dungeon challenges essentially revolve around a dungeon maker, where the player can customize their own dungeons by placing down previous rooms cleared from other dungeons present throughout the game. 7 of the required 14 chamber stones to collect are found throughout Koholint Island by obtaining various items or completing various challenges, while the other 7 are obtained by purchasing them in the May Village shop for 1,280 rupees each. Yes, you heard that right. I'll need to purchase almost 9,000 rupees worth of chamber stones in order to 100% complete the game, so I made sure to scrounge up as many rupees as possible during my playthrough of Link's main quest. I didn't actually worry too much about completing Dampé's challenges until towards the very end of my playthrough of Link's Awakening, so I'll touch on those a little later on. So back to Dungeon 1. This dungeon was a piece of cake, except I think I found my new favorite sound effect in any video game to ever exist. Just listen to how satisfying that sounds. I would smack these coconut head dudes all day if I had the time to. For real though, the sound effects in this remake are something else. They sound so good. Like, just listen to this water sound effect. Auditory bliss. So after killing Moldworm with ease, I nabbed a couple more heart containers, saved Bow Wow who got dog napped, chain chomp napped? Whatever. The guy got taken by some roided up moblin dude who I took out. I then cleared up the second dungeon, Bottle Grotto with ease, got my magic powder capacity upgraded by a bat in a cave, and decided to grind for rupees for a bit so that I could purchase a piece of heart for 200 rupees. I probably should have just waited until the end of the game to buy this piece of heart, when I probably would have naturally had more rupees, but I went ahead and purchased it now because it was on my radar, and I didn't want to forget about it. Also, I know that you can steal items from the shop owner relatively easily, but I wanted to do it the legit way because that just seems wrong. Also, when you enter the shop after stealing from him, he kills you instantly. I decided to include beating the game without dying as part of the 100% completion criteria, because it unlocks a special cutscene at the end of the game where you see Marin turn into a seagull. So I didn't want to steal from the shop owner and die and not be able to see that secret ending. Requiring myself to not die once may seem like a crazy thing to include in a marathon run such as this, but it's actually pretty easy to not die in the game. I bought some magic medicine from this lady named Crazy Tracy that heals me when I run out of health, and if I somehow managed to actually die, I would just reload a previous save. So from here, I gave some cheeky monkeys my banana for a stick, definitely a fair trade, farmed some more secret seashells to claim a piece of heart reward from the Seashell Mansion, and gathered up some golden leaves to give to this guy named Richard, so that I could get the key to access Dungeon 3 Key Cavern. Before I entered the dungeon though, I did a crap ton of seashell farming with a shell that I purchased at the Maid Village shop, and eventually brought my total seashell count to 20 seashells, allowing myself to claim the next Seashell Mansion reward of the Seashell Sensor, which notifies me when seashells are nearby. I actually did not need this sensor though, because I had the best seashell sensor known to mankind, the internet. So with my bags overflowing with seashells, I encouraged Terran's stupidity by giving him a stick to poke a beehive with, and received a honeycomb as a reward for my generosity. I then entered dungeon number 3, Key Cavern. Key Cavern was definitely a step up in difficulty compared to Dungeons 1 and 2. In here, I met the one enemy in this game that I despised the most. These stupid looking dodo bird Kirby things. They're able to teleport around, which they only do immediately before Link touches them with his sword. In a lot of rooms throughout this game, you're asked to kill these guys to unlock some sort of secret. And in Key Cavern, there was one room that tripped me up quite a bit, where in order to kill these guys, you're supposed to place a bomb down where you expect them to teleport and then swipe at them with your sword to make them die by the bomb explosion after they teleport. Other than these guys being challenging, this dungeon was pretty easy, as Link's Awakening's dungeons are generally pretty tame in terms of puzzles. So after opening all chests in the dungeon, which even led to a whopping 300 rupee reward, I took out Slime Eye and put the dungeon in my past. I then did a bunch of random miscellaneous things required for 100% completion. I collected some heart pieces, gave a bear with some super realistic looking soup a honeycomb in exchange for some pineapple, and bumped into Marin at the beach where I witnessed Link and his negative Riz skills. Really, Link, she really hits you with the, "Aren't you going to say anything?" And you all wonder why Link never gets any action from Zelda in any of his games. Also no, apparently this one doesn't count. Evidently, they're just hugging. The flying caterpillar from A Link to the Past made a return, so I took it out to obtain a key to the next dungeon, Angler's Tunnel. Before entering this next dungeon though, I did some miscellaneous things such as obtaining more secret seashells across Koholint Island to bring my total count to 30, nabbed a piece of heart from the Crane game, and dashed into a bookcase in the May Village Library to unlock the secret path to a hidden dungeon called the Color Dungeon. This extra dungeon isn't required to beat the game, where it's only required for 100% completion. I made sure to tackle it as soon as possible though, because the reward upon completing it is super helpful, where you can either choose between the red tunic, which doubles the amount of damage Link deals, or the blue tunic, which halves the damage Link receives. Upon completing the dungeon, I went with the red tunic because I had Crazy Tracy's healing medicine, and so much health already that I probably wasn't going to die anytime soon. And the red tunic allows me to kill enemies faster, allowing me to complete the game quicker. So after exiting the color dungeon, I put the angler key into its slot to unlock the next dungeon, gave a guy my pineapple in exchange for a hibiscus to progress the game's training sequence, and tackled Dungeon 4, Angler's Tunnel with ease. After exiting the dungeon, I traveled a short distance and learned the Manbo's Mambo song, which I made heavy use of because it allows Link to fast travel to one of the many warp areas in Koholint Island. Next, I obtained some more pieces of heart and secret seashells scattered across the island, put up with the ghost's incessant complaining to get an empty bottle, and made a lot of progress through the trading sequence where I got the letter item, helped a goat lady catfish a poor man to get a broom, got a fishing hook, necklace, and finally witnessed Link do some questionable things to a mermaid as he got one of her scales, allegedly. I then paid my man Mad Batter another visit to get the upgraded bomb bag, allowing me to hold a whopping 60, more than I could ever dream of ever needing to use. And then I finally made my way into the next dungeon, dungeon number 5, Catfish's Maw. This dungeon went down pretty standard, except there's a pair of mini-bosses that go down as my most hated boss in the game, Goma. In standard Goma fashion, in order to take these guys down, you're supposed to shoot them in the eye until they're dead. But in this version of the game, it takes so long for them to reveal their weak points. And it's not like the fight is even that challenging. It's just a bunch of waiting around until they open their eyes. Also, what's even worse is that in this dungeon, that mini-boss fight isn't even required in the slightest to make progress or unlock any sort of special item. The fight just takes place in some side room, isolated from the rest of the dungeon. So once the dungeon was defeated, I decided to progress to the end of the trading sequence by obtaining the magnifying lens, and then finally the boomerang, which was honestly pretty underwhelming, as I didn't use the boomerang much at all. Most of the time when you hit enemies with it, it just stuns them instead of killing them, so you might as well just use the bow instead if you're going for ranged attacks. Eventually, after getting a few more secret seashells and pieces of heart, I made my way over to one of the many minigames that exist in the Zelda universe, Rapids Ride. In this minigame, you ride on a, you guessed it, raft, and travel down a river and collect goodies along the way. There are two versions of this minigame, one where you leisurely collect items at a slow pace called Rapids Raid, and one where you race down the rapids as fast as possible called Rapids Race, and each have their own set of collectibles needed for 100% completion. Rapids Raid was the easier of the two, where I collected a piece of heart and a secret seashell with relative ease. Rapids Race has 3 collectibles I needed, a piece of heart for getting to the bottom of the rapids in under 40 seconds, a secret seashell for getting there in less than 35 seconds, and a chamber stone for getting there in under 30 seconds. At first, I didn't realize I could use a grappling hook to go faster down the rapids, so once with that knowledge, I was able to obtain the 40-second and 35-second rewards with relative ease. The final reward of getting to the bottom of the rapids in under 30 seconds, however, was its own beast. You have to get to the bottom of the rapids almost flawlessly with almost no mistakes. I even looked up a video of a route to get down as quickly as possible, and even with that guide pulled up on the side, I still consistently made it to the bottom of the rapids a few seconds or so longer than the threshold. But in one attempt, I was on the best pace I had ever been at. At the 23-second mark, I was along the final stretch, using the grappling hook diagonally to weave through the vines blocking my path as quickly as possible. I was nearing the final bend before the finish line when I missed my hook shot to a tree, causing me to leisurely coast along the rapids instead of being propelled to the finish line. I did manage to get a short hookshot boost to a nearby vine though, and then I coasted to the finish line, crossing my fingers that I would make it there in under 30 seconds. With less than 2 seconds until the cutoff, I slowly made my way to the finish line, jumped off the waterfall, and... 29.94 seconds. Only 6/100ths of a second to spare. Just for reference of how close that actually was, this game runs at 60 frames per second, so there was only about 3 to 4 frames until I would reach the cutoff time of 30 seconds. So shaking with adrenaline, I collected my chamber stone and left Rapids Ride without looking back. The secret seashell that I got in the Rapids Ride minigame actually allowed me to collect my next seashell mansion reward, where I obtained the Cajolan Sword, which increases Link's damage dealt, causing me to be an unstoppable war machine, coupled with the red tunic I had on as well. At this point, I had already spent a little bit more time playing Zelda on the second day compared to the first day of the challenge, but I was honestly feeling pretty good at this point. Link's Awakening for the Switch is a beautiful game, and I was feeling pretty immersed, was having a good time, and was quite frankly on a roll. So instead of calling it quits for the day, I decided to keep playing for a little while longer. From here, I took on the next dungeon, Face Shrine, where I took out a Cyclops shark creature and then decided to take on one of the most difficult challenges in the game, endgame fishing. As you progress through the main dungeons, more variety of fish are able to be caught at the fishing hole, and naturally, more collectibles are available as well that are required for 100% completion. The most difficult fish to catch is deemed the Old Baron, where the player is gifted a chamber stone for catching one, as well as another chamber stone for catching an Old Baron 60 inches or greater in length. You don't actually know the length of the Old Baron until after you catch it, so there's a bit of luck involved hoping that the Old Baron that you're fishing for is large enough to get the reward. I got extremely lucky my first attempt of catching the large fish, where the first Old Baron that I caught was 60 inches or greater, so I got 2 of the associated chamber stones at once. Also, I didn't really even think that fish was that hard to catch. It just takes a bit of patience. After resetting the fishing hole a few times to get fish to respawn, I also pretty easily caught a Cheep Cheep and a blooper to net myself a couple of secret seashells along with a heavyweight lure. Next, I tackled the Eagle's Tower dungeon, which probably would have been pretty challenging if I hadn't played the DX version of this game about a year ago, so this dungeon was pretty familiar to me. I'm pretty sure I got softlocked about midway through though, where there was seemingly nowhere to go, so I just warped to the entrance of the dungeon using the Manbo's Mambo song, but before long, I made it to the boss fight and took out Evil Eagle, completing the dungeon. From here, I got the last equipment upgrade where I upgraded the bow capacity to a whopping 60, dug up the 50th and final secret seashell, which netted me a rupee effect that I could apply to the rooms in Dampé's chamber dungeons. This rupee effect ended up being super helpful for me in acquiring enough rupees to purchase all 7 chamber stones from the Maid Village shop, where once applied to all rooms, rupees rained down on the player, allowing the player to collect hundreds of rupees in a single room. More on those chamber dungeons later on though. I then made my way into the last dungeon of the game, Turtle Rock. Now at this point, I was feeling pretty fatigued for the day. I had completed A Link to the Past, completed most of Link's Awakening, and was clocked in at a little over 14 hours of playing Zelda for the day. So in an attempt to keep my sanity, I decided to go to bed for the night, feeling pretty pleased with the progress I made thus far. Kicking things off in the morning, I started playing through Turtle Rock, the last true dungeon of the game, but unfortunately far from reaching 100% completion. Turtle Rock is structured like a regular dungeon, but there's also an outdoor section that has a few goodies we needed to collect. I obtained the final piece of heart to collect in the game and unlocked the 10th and final warp location. Before long, I beat the boss and opened all chests in the dungeon before I decided to tackle a new challenge, obtaining all 10 figurines from the Crane minigame. Obtaining all 10 figurines was actually a pretty fun challenge. You would think playing the same exact Crane game 10 times would get tedious, but each figurine is shaped differently, causing them to react differently when you go to grab them. The hardest figurines to nab were the ones on moving platforms, but after enough trial and error, I got the timing down for those well enough. One of the craziest rounds took place when I tried to get the Shy Guy figurine. Wait for it. I barely got the figurine. I wasn't as lucky with the last few figurines I had to collect though, where their shape made them particularly annoying to grab. The piranha plant, for example, required a few attempts for me, and the very last figurine of the Bow Wow's head was the most annoying out of all of them to catch. His head is so large that it barely fit in the claws of the crane, so you have to be nearly perfect to actually grab the thing. But once you have it in the claw, the thing's not coming out. Interestingly enough, this last figurine is only available after you beat the game. The actual final boss of Link's Awakening was fine. I was armed to the teeth after getting very close to 100% completion, so there was no real risk of me dying. So I took out Deathel, and watched Marin soar in the sky as a seagull due to me beating the game without dying. But my journey to 100% Link's Awakening was far from over. I still have one of the most hated aspects of this game left to complete: Dampé's Chamber Dungeons. There's a total of 24 Dampé challenges, where for each challenge, the player is tasked to create dungeons made from rooms that are present in the main 8 dungeons in the game. For each challenge, Dampé also has a constraint that you have to abide by. Once the dungeon is created, you have to play through it to mark the challenge as completed. Each completed challenge nets a reward for the player, such as a piece of heart, secret seashell, or rupees. The act of playing through each dungeon that I created wasn't that difficult. The difficult part was creating each dungeon such that I could complete them as quickly as possible. To complete each challenge, you're required to open every single chest that you place down, so one tactic I used to go fast was to place down as small a number of chests as possible. I wasn't able to do this for every challenge though, because remember, I still needed to collect almost 9,000 rupees to purchase chamber stones, so I needed to include chests in the dungeons that I created to rack up my rupee count. It took a few hours, but after opening dozens upon dozens of chests, and abusing that rupee effect that rains down rupees, I was finally able to obtain enough rupees to purchase the rest of the chamber stones. Once all chamber stones were purchased, I blasted through the rest of Dampé's challenges as quickly as possible, putting down a scarce amount of chests. Also, for each challenge, you're forced to create a boss fight. I chose to fight Moldworm every single time because that seemed like the fastest boss to beat, and with my red tunic and Koholint sword, I was able to kill Moldworm in a matter of seconds. Check this out. So after hours of placing down rooms and clearing them out, I was finally able to complete all 24 of Dampé's challenges. To say this process was tedious would be an understatement. These challenges were super boring, and more often than not, I would place down the same room templates every single time because I would always choose the easiest ones to progress through. And playing through these chamber dungeons was the first instance where I had an urge to actually quit the challenge because of how boring it was. I also don't think it helped that I saved a large majority of the side mode to play all at once at the end of the game, where I think I would have preserved my sanity if I distributed playing through the chamber dungeons throughout my entire playthrough of Link's Awakening. Now there's a few more additional unlockables that may constitute as being required for 100% completion that I don't think should count, which are the amiibo exclusive content. If you scan the Link's Awakening Link amiibo, you can unlock a Shadow Link effect, which spawns a Shadow Link that tries to kill you. And if you scan 5 other random Legend of Zelda amiibos, you unlock 5 additional room templates that you can place down in the challenges. All 5 of them are just rooms present from the base game, so they're nothing really special if I'm being honest. All in all though, these amiibo exclusive figures aren't really worth it, and I would be appalled if someone bought all these amiibos just to say that they achieved 100% completion for this game. Yeah, I caved in and bought the amiibo. Do I regret it? No. Do I plan on actually using the features unlocked with the amiibo? No. But I achieved true 100% completion, and that's all that matters. Now, I initially planned on fitting this challenge into one video, but there is way too much stuff to cover that I feel like I had to split it up into multiple parts. I mean, just look at this video. Over an hour long and I've only completed 4 out of 10 games, and I'm still only on day 3 of the challenge. So I've decided to split this video into 3 parts, where parts 2 and 3 will be posted shortly after this video gets posted. So if you're early, stay tuned for parts 2 and 3, but if those are already up, go check those out. In the next video, we'll start with taking on a set of 2 games that made me the most nervous at the outset of taking on this challenge. 2 games that have so much content to collect that you need to play both games twice in order to 100% them. 2 games with so much randomness and BS that it would drive even veteran Zelda players up a wall. These 2 games are The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons.